I'd love to bring out our first panel. It's kind of our homegrown panel. Moderating How Does Your Garden Grow? Please welcome entrepreneur, producer, musician, host, co-chair of the Emma Board of Directors, and of course, icon, Lance Bass.
Well, good morning, everybody. All right, I'd like to bring up my panelists for this morning, Rob Herring, environmental filmmaker, whose latest film is The Need to Grow. Kerri Eich, health and international food teacher, University High School Charter. Kathy Kellogg Johnson, co-owner and director of sustainability, Kellogg Garden Products. And Jennifer Nickerson, senior vice president, corporate citizenship manager, City National Bank, and presenting sponsor of Emma School Garden Program. All right, panel, we are the first panel of the summit, which I'm very excited about, so I'm gonna give you as much energy as we can this morning. Let's start with you, Jennifer. As presenting sponsor of the Emma School Garden Program, why is it so important for businesses to support local community programs like this garden?
Well, thank you for having me here and having the bank here. First of all, I think corporate citizenship is important for any company to represent themselves well in the community, and City National is a Los Angeles-based bank. This is where we live, this is where we work, so supporting our community just makes good business sense, and then working with partners like Emma and University High School and just to help amplify the message. It's just what companies need to do.
Now, Kerri, what are the benefits for both teachers and students in implementing a garden program at the school?
Well, I think we always think about the education only happens in the classroom as teachers, and there's so much, all of our school campuses have a lot of green space, and that's where students hang out when they're not in the classroom, and you want them to feel like this is their place. This is what they're part of. And if you can give kids a place on campus where they tend it, they get to decide what happens there, they get to kind of create beauty within their outdoor landscape where they're at with their friends, and it changes the culture around how they appreciate their school, how they appreciate nature, how they appreciate food.
Yeah, and what physical things have you seen from your students at the school?
Well, it's interesting. Some kids, after being in class, they want to go home and maybe build their own garden. We did it improving health within your community, and some students saw vacant spaces within their community, and they went and fixed it and tended to it. Just them understanding how to stop and observe and be patient. There's a lot of things that happen within our lives today that everything's moving really fast, and how do we slow that down? How do we really become caretakers? How do we start to nurture things besides just ourselves? And doing that in a way with plants, they can see when they haven't tended to it. They can see when other things kind of come in and take over. And they realize, well, wait, it was just so little. I've got to really spend some time with it. And it changes the way they see plants. And that hopefully changes the way they see food, right, and changes the way they might see themselves as well.
Do you see any correlation to the students learning about gardening and maybe helping them in other aspects of their academics?
Well, they've said it's therapeutic. I surveyed some students, and they were talking about how it made them more relaxed, how it gave them a sense of like ownership and pride. Many of our students at University High School don't own their home. They're renting. They're used to everybody else telling them what to do, and when they have the opportunity to decide, what goes in their garden, because they choose everything. I don't run the gardens at University High School. The students do, and I help them manage that. And so it just changes the way they see something because it's theirs.
Yeah. Kathy, who is also the godmother of my garden at home, thank you so, which is still flourishing somehow because I don't really do anything to it. So
it's the soil.
Thank you.
It's the soil. Lance.
Which, by the way, I'm going to say soil. My southern accent comes out, and I say soul. So just in case I say that, I'm saying soil. What do these garden programs mean to you, Kathy?
Well, soil and soul have a lot in common, actually, a whole lot. And the soil is something that really, truly begins, the kids get their hands in it. There's all kinds of evidence that there's something that happens when you dig into soil. There's actually a little bacterium that is released that it increases your health, a lot like melatonin. And so in in gardening, I started when I had 3-year-olds, right, with just getting out there. And one of the things that they learn is patience. As you pointed out, I had a little girl just crouched down next to the strawberry that we planted together, and she's all crouched down there. And I'm like, Samantha, it's time to go back to class. She's like, when's the strawberry get here? So they don't understand anything besides microwave mentality, that they put it in the microwave, they come out and eat it. So I love experiencing a child's time in the garden. I personally love failure in the garden. I think it's one of the best teachers. Mm-hmm. When you put something in the ground and it didn't come out like you wanted it to, didn't happen in your garden. Your garden's amazing.
No, it did. For half of it did. But now all my herbs are going great. The rest of the stuff, I had so many things eat, my pumpkins, all that. Yeah, so it's a learning experience for sure.
Yeah, and it's life. So right? So critters eat your pumpkins, right? And or we have, I believe in at Kellogg, we've been around for 95 years. It all is life. Life in the soil and life above the soil. We're adding ladybugs and lacewings, and we're adding creatures that then eat the aphids that are eating the plants. We're adding life to the garden, and if you're there in a school garden, boy, don't the bugs attract the most attention? Mm-hmm. The wriggly worms right under the soil, and you know you have an incredibly healthy garden the more that you have going on.
Yeah, you just learn about ecosystems, which is so important for everyone to understand. Now, Rob, filmmaker, you just did an amazing documentary. By the way, if you watch it, you're going to want some Girl Scout cookies. You'll see it when you watch the movie. Why did you want to do a doc about environment?
Sure. We'd seen a lot of people just get overwhelmed with the problems, I think, and just feeling paralyzed. And is there anything more I can do besides march or point the finger? So we wanted to inspire solutions. So we were asking ourselves, can we make a film about solutions? And what we realized quickly when it comes to the food system is, like Kathy was saying, is it's all about the soil. And something that not a lot of people know about is how much we're depleting our soils. Mm-hmm. So, there's a huge difference between dead dirt, which has no life, no biodiversity, and soil, which has trillions of microorganisms. So when we looked at that, we saw soil is really the foundation for so many environmental issues. It regulates water, it cleans our air, it increases nutrient density, which is going to give healthy, grow healthy people. But the big thing is the connection of carbon to soil. So we have this beautiful solution called photosynthesis, which pulls carbon out of the air, and healthy soil will actually store it in the ground. So, the UN report came out that said we had 60 years of soil left on the planet at the rate that we destroy it. So we've eroded about 70% of that. But the really cool thing is that soil regenerates really fast when you learn these solutions. So teaching them to kids, particularly compost, as Kathy knows quite a bit about, that's closing the loop on how we can actually regenerate this planet.
Right, and let's talk about composting. Why is it so important that we learn to compost, and how, as just an average person, how do I help compost if I'm in an area that it's really hard to do?
Yeah, so to your first point, back in, I'm going to age myself, but in 1970, gardening next to my dad, I was saying, why are we pouring dirt on dirt, back when I didn't know the right word. Soil, he said, we were pouring compost out around the fruit trees we had just planted, and he said, every soil is starving for organic matter, while we throw organic matter in landfills. Somehow, it was a good idea. It wasn't a good idea, but in the 70s, to take canyons and dump garbage in them. And 70% of what it is that we put in landfills is organic, and yet our soil is starving for organic matter. It doesn't make sense. So what does make sense is to recover everything you can out of the food waste stream, out of your grass clippings, out of your tree trimmings, pull them together, compost them, restore soil, and then grow food and grow vegetables. Your second part of your question was, how do you do it yourself? Do you have a composting bin out back?
I do not, no.
Well, one of the simplest things to do is just start, right? In your kitchen, gather every banana peel, the simple stuff, not meat scraps, not eggs, but start with a little container on your counter and have a pile somewhere, if you have a yard, somewhere out back. There's also a lot of green waste composting programs, and if no city employees are here, you can put your scraps in the city compost. Yeah. You can just bury them there in your green grass clippings, and then reduce the amount of garbage put out at the street. Again, garbage makes no sense. What makes a lot of sense is to treat your soils like the mechanism they are. Rob alluded to, they will continue to consume organic matter, and when the little bacteria, protozoa, all the actinomycetes, the fungi, and the mycorrhizal fungi, what they all do when they're eating each other is they then feed the plants. So in our organic system, where you have 3 inches of compost just loaded up in your garden, you've just set this ball in motion that feeds plants continually, and as Rob says, that solar energy, that solar feature, which is a leaf, pulls in the sun, right? You kids all have learned this in school already, right? It pulls in carbon dioxide, it generates a lot of oxygen for us to breathe, and then it takes those carbon sugars and excretes them out of the roots of the plant and feeds all the same little creatures I just talked about. So you're starting a system, and guess what? You're impacting climate change.
Nice.
Like Michael Pollan said, the single best thing you can do to impact climate change is to plant a garden.
Kerri, do you need another teacher at the school?
Yeah, well, I'm always learning from Kathy, and and I think it's really interesting as we think about like how do we benefit the soil. Just even in my home garden, I redid that this year, and sometimes with pests, you don't want to have your compost bin out where other things can get into it. So I just took some black tubing, some drainage pipe, and I ran it through my garden, and I elevated my garden so I don't have to dig in, and I put a lid on top, and so all I have to do is drop all of my food waste into there. I threw some worms into there, so now the worms are composting and breaking it down, and then my plants can go for it, but it's a covered system because it's actually buried in my garden. And it's just, I don't know if it necessarily works great yet because I just designed it, but you're always learning and trying things, and you learn from your mistakes. And sometimes the worst mistake turns into like the best idea because you've grown from that, and you can take what you learned, and hopefully then transition it to something better.
Yeah. Now, Jennifer, what did you know about gardening and soil before you got into sponsoring these school gardens?
A little and a lot. I mean, it's funny when you guys were talking earlier, I was thinking about back to like first grade and actually taking egg crates and planting a seed and watching it grow and the joy in that. And I have had many gardens. Most of them did not survive, but I'm really good at succulents. So I stick with my forte. But one thing that I didn't have a whole lot of, I'm really nascent in my journey on sort of environmentalism. And I mean, I've been recycling for a while and doing things, but I never really found what I wanted, and I never found something that made sense to me, I guess, where I could really dig in. And I hearken back to, I started my career at the March of Dimes, which, if any of you know, it's a charity that was founded on the idea that if everybody gave one dime, you could cure polio, this back in the 50s. And that's what people did. And guess what? They cured polio. And so, to me, I think one of the things that I love about supporting and helping relaunch the garden program, the Green My Schools with Kellogg and with Kathy, is that it really is a matter of everyone can do a little bit to make a big difference. And I think it's very overwhelming sometimes to look at, what's going on. And if any of you saw Bill Nye on John Oliver, Google it if you didn't, because it's hysterical. But it's just, when people are telling you, we're blowing up this world is on fire, and still you cannot get people to move and take action, because I think a lot of people just feel sort of overwhelmed by that. And so I think it's really important to realize that everyone can do a little bit. Everyone in this room can make one more step. Maybe you're already doing something. Maybe if you live in Los Angeles, you're probably carrying your bags into the grocery store. Hopefully you're recycling. Maybe you're using non-disposable straws. You're looking towards when other organizations and companies are getting rid of plastics. Maybe you can start composting. Maybe, there's just something you can do. And part of what City National has a strong literacy program. We do financial literacy primarily, do a lot of reading literacy. And this intersection with Emma was really about what can we do to support Emma that is authentic to City National and our literacy efforts? And so Debbie and I talked about what that would be, and it was like, well, what if we did environmental literacy? What if we helped kids understand what they can do, individual steps that they can take to help improve our climate, improve our earth, improve the environment? And so our interaction on this is really to help children understand that you don't have to wait till you're an adult, and you don't have to be a Greta Thunberg to do it either. Everyone can do something. And I was speaking at something recently where I said, a lot of change is driven by kids. I see a lot of youth in this group, and I think that's fantastic because I shared my mother-in-law adamantly, for no other reason than laziness, refused to recycle plastic or aluminum until my children shamed her into it. And now she recycles it religiously. And if you as children go home and you talk to your parents and you say, what about this? Or can't we do that? Or why are we doing that? Or why are you doing this? We can do better. You can really drive that change in a really meaningful way just in your family. And I think there's a real ripple effect to that we can't underestimate.
Yeah, it's great. To any of y'all, how does an everyday community person get involved with a garden program? Like, how would you volunteer? Like, what can you do, and what steps can you make to make a difference?
Yeah, well, I think everyone doing something is a big piece of this puzzle, right? Everyone doing a little, like everyone has been talking about. So composting is a huge thing that anybody can do. I just want to quickly reiterate on just putting something in a freezer so it doesn't rot in your house. Throw it in a little Tupperware, and then just toss it in the green bin, or if you get a composting bin. That is huge takeaway. I think once you start getting involved, you can look for people that are composting. There's a website called makesoil.org that just launched that shows where people are composting in your neighborhood. You can connect that way. You could go to community gardens, try to get a plot. You'll start to meet other people. You'll learn that way as well. And I think a big thing for teachers is, as they plan for school gardens, is making sure that the summer is planned for as well, and budgeting that in and having staff. So, the school garden can be a huge opportunity for anybody, whether they have kids or not. Another thing, when we talk about the impact of children in our film, early in the film, we have this quote by Confucius that says, if your plan is for 1 year, plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant trees. If your plan is for 100 years, educate children. And I think that's really important because there are actually studies that show with successful school garden programs that 70% increase the kids want to eat fruits and vegetables, and that does translate back to their home. We see increase in leadership skills, social skills, community development, self-awareness, confidence, all of those things. So, it's not, school garden may seem trivial in the big picture when we're looking at all this biodiversity loss, but the fact is, giving children the opportunity to have a nostalgic experience or an experience of awe and wonder at the cycles of nature, it's really not trivial because we're really also increasing mental health at the same time for all these kids, which we know is a huge deal as well.
Yeah. And I think you don't know what spark you're going to light either. You could be showing someone science. We were talking about this little terrarium, and just, it wasn't part of a gardening class, it was part of a science class. Yeah. And I just think, when you're in there and they're learning about biodiversity and photosynthesis, maybe you spark something that's even beyond just those immediate benefits. So I think that's fantastic.
Can you explain this terrarium for us?
Well, so this is a bottle biology, which is free curriculum online from University of Wisconsin, put it out. But I had friends that were working in an orphanage in Haiti, and they said, we would really like to do a garden, but how could you help us? We have a lot of plastic bottles that wash up. We just have plastic bottles everywhere. And so this was something that it just kind of, our science teacher was already doing it. And you can create, it's just a wicking system with a shoelace, some cotton wick, and a couple bottles and some seeds. And I think seeds are somewhat intimidating for students because you put them in your garden, you're never sure if they're going to come up, if you get water to them, keeping things consistent. Once the plant sprouts, it's much easier to keep alive. So this has been something that our science students have been bringing down to our classroom or putting in our garden, and now we have more plants because with a school garden, plants are expensive and you don't always have a big budget. The idea of how do we do something, I think really getting to know your community, walking around your neighborhood, there is such a wealth of knowledge in our communities, and we don't do a good enough job of talking to people, finding out, what we can learn from each other, asking questions. And I think the more you get to know what your community needs, we have disaster relief plans throughout Los Angeles through different training programs, CERT, Community Emergency Response Training. If you were interested in doing something for your community, going around and finding out if there was a natural disaster and we were short of food, do you have anything in your yard that you could put towards our community? Or maybe start a community like once a month you put a basket out of food of whatever you're growing. Maybe you challenge everybody to grow one thing. You do tomatoes, I'll do cucumbers. Finding ways to interact within your community, whether it's your school community or your home community, I think it will change the way you see the things that you can do, the power of just your voice and your thoughts and your creativity.
With these garden programs, how are they looked after during the summer when there's no kids at school?
Well, in high school, we have a lot of students that still come to campus either through athletics or through summer school. Kids need community service. I have students that are going to be responsible for the garden over the summer. At the elementary school, we have, we try to put some things on timer systems. The garden will do its own thing as long as it's still getting what it needs. The moisture, sun's persistent here. So, as long as we have a good watering system, and I think that's probably the biggest struggle of most school gardens is making sure they have an efficient way to water their gardens with timers and they're following the protocols of the school and the board. And also finding volunteers is great, but sometimes you can't do that. So.
Are there any incentives like school credits or anything like that?
Well, there isn't necessarily school credits because somebody would have to be present to administer that. But community service is something that all students need to graduate, most high schools. And I think students usually do the bare minimum. Some students go above and beyond, and it's just you want to find a responsible student that's going to show up and do that. And it's always fun because you get to pick all the produce. It's like free, it's like going to a free grocery store all summer long because that's when the garden is producing the most fruit.
Yeah.
Robin, doing your film, what was the biggest takeaway from you? What did you learn the most in doing this?
I learned that a lot of the people who are working on the biggest solutions out there are facing, entrepreneurial challenges. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room or attending this event that, had their challenges along the way. And we traveled the country. First, we wanted to look at urban agriculture solutions. So we were going to every major city for rooftop farming and indoor vertical farms. And that was before the movie really shifted to focus on soil. But all of the three characters in our film are really entrepreneurs in their own way. And they all face struggles. It's not going to be a walk in the park. But I think, there's no more deserving fight than focusing on, regenerating our future. So for us, it was really eye-opening to see how many people were doing things. Very often we get siloed and we go to a city and we meet with some people and they say, hey, have you heard about these other folks? Here's another community program, here's another business, another startup. And we would see people all over the country that were doing similar things but weren't necessarily communicating with each other. And it was just like, there's so much good work going on, there's no way we could meet everyone, which I thought was really encouraging. We don't hear a lot about all of the good news and all of the good work that's going on. We're so focused on, the overwhelming disaster that could be looming if we don't take action. But the fact is there's so many people taking action.
Exactly.
And when you get out there and see that, when you connect with your community, you realize there's like-minded folks like everyone in this room, and it is really hopeful.
Yeah, and I think that's the message we do need to send out there more. And I know us at Emma is trying to spread the message of hope and what people are doing. How important is it for media to tell the right message, and are they telling the right message right now?
Yeah. I've always been super geeky about solutions if they're a cross-section of technology, biology, and culture. So we have to have the most cutting-edge technologies, but that doesn't just mean efficient, because you can efficiently clear-cut a forest. You have to have biology in mind. So that could be humans, that could be endangered species, it could be this microbial life that's in our soils that I think is really crucial to everything else. But then the third piece is that cultural piece, and it's something that Emma does really well, which is encouraging the storytellers, the people who have platform, the people who have influence. And I think, the more that we can show these everyday solutions, there is a responsibility that people have, which is why companies realize how important their branding and their marketing is. But the more that we can show people these everyday little steps that they can do, that it's not so, black and white if you don't go all or nothing. The most important thing is the little steps. So the more that we have influencers, I think, showcasing that they're growing food and they're excited about it, they think it's cool, they're composting, they're participating in recycling their film plastic, which is something people don't think about, they're not using straws, they're reducing their meat intake, things like that. These are the small steps that more and more people just need to get excited about.
Yeah. Kathy, what is the most important thing about soil? What do we not know?
Well, I think I touched upon it earlier, all that in this handful of soil, if it were soil in my hand, there are more organisms in it than there are people on the planet. Billions of organisms, trillions of organisms actually are in this handful of soil. We haven't even speciated them yet. We know more about the stars in the sky than we know about the creatures in the soil.
That's crazy.
And so I love that there's an effort underway right now to identify what are these things in the soil and what role do they play in saving the planet, because truly the solution lies within the soil. And I mean, even if the movie Inconvenient Truth rolled, credits, it said, this horrible earth is coming to an end and turn off your light bulb. No. It's like, wait a minute, I'm so puny and the world's so big, what do I do? Truly, 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 planting a garden, regenerating soil is something that is within your control. Even a little herb box or a little tomato plant in a pot on your patio, you are impacting the planet. You are doing a tremendous amount to reduce a carbon footprint. So I'd say that's the most important thing.
I love it. Well, guys, we are out of time, but before we go, I always like to know, what is your favorite thing to grow? Go, Rob.
Leafy greens grow really easily and fast. Basil is a pretty good one to impress people. Having fresh basil, because you can make a salad out of it and it's like, whoa. Mm-hmm. So that would be a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I've been growing purple sweet potatoes that I got for Christmas 5 years ago. For the last 5 years, and it's my Christmas present to all my family, because you can grow a huge abundance of them, not much space, so that's my favorite.
I want to try that next.
That is not fair for you to ask me.
Yeah,
so not fair. I love to cook barefoot, so I like to have parsley and cilantro right outside my door, and rosemary, so that I can grab them and put them in when I'm cooking. But kohlrabi and fennel are pretty spectacular. They're a bulb that you can eat and roast. It's so good.
Succulents.
Nice, of course. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for our first panel, and thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you in a bit.
Thank you.
Thanks.